Welcome back to Chess Dog. Today we have an exciting game from Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura from the FIDE World Blitz Championship. His opponent is Vladimir Fedoseev. Nakamura comes into the game with a Blitz rating of 2909. I think that may be the highest Blitz rating in the world. You can correct me on that in the comments section if I'm wrong. Fedoseev, no slouch at 2733. It's 3 minutes for each side with a 2-second increment. And this is a really fun game. I think you're going to enjoy it. We see a lot of Hikaru's tactical brilliance in this game. Let's jump right in. Hikaru has white. Fedoseev has black. He begins with the move e4. Fedoseev plays e5 and bishop to c4. The bishop's opening. One advantage of this move order is it does avoid knight f3 and knight f6, the Petrov defense, which is a tough nut to crack. It's a tough opening to win against. So bishop to c4 sidesteps that, knight f6, d3, bishop to c5, knight to c3. So you notice Hikaru is delaying the development of the knight at g1. And the reason he's doing that is because he wants to leave this f-pawn unblocked, because that's going to be his main pawn break, hopefully. That's the idea in the bishop opening, is that f4 is your main pawn break. Now c6. This is one of the advantages for black against the bishop's opening. His knight is not developed at c6 yet, so that allows him to play c6 with the threat of d5, gaining a tempo against the bishop at c4. The bishop preemptively backs up to b3 so that black can't hit it with tempo, and now Fedoseev decides to just go ahead and play d6 and get this little calmer structure instead of playing to d5. Black's center can come under pressure if he plays d5. h3 is played by Nakamura. That keeps a piece out of g4, and in some positions, white can actually play g4 himself and launch an attack. That doesn't really happen in this game, but it's a possibility after h3. Queen to e7, developing the queen, perhaps supporting a bishop going to e6. Knight g to e2. Nakamura keeps the f-pawn unblocked. Remember, because f4 is his main pawn break. a5 gaining space on the queen side and potentially playing b5 and a4 and giving the bishop at b3 a lot of trouble. The knight jumps to g3, and it's aiming at this really strong f5 square. In all of these openings that are e4, e5 openings, this f5 square is a very strong square for a white knight, and f4 is a strong square for black's knight too, so that's a common strategy. h6 keeps the knight at f6 from being pinned by the bishop at c1. a3 giving the bishop a place to hide on a2. b5 continuing to gain space, and here queen to f3. So obviously he's not going to break with f4 just yet, but the idea of queen to f3 is very strong. He's clamping down on d5 so that black can't play d5 later. And if white can keep black from playing d5, that allows him to maneuver his pieces into attacking positions. Also, the queen at f3 supports a knight jump to f5, so if the bishop were to take the knight, he could retake with the queen and not damage his pawn structure by taking with the pawn. Also, this move prevents knight b to d7. This would be a mistake here because now knight to f5 would jump in, hitting the queen and the g7 pawn, and that would be strong. So because of that, Fedoseev plays his knight to a6 to try to get into the game via c5 later. Castles and bishop to b6, maneuvering the bishop so the knight can become more active via the c5 square. Bishop to e3 directly challenges this bishop on b6. Now, this is an important moment. Fedoseev could play knight to c5 here, but white's doing well. There is some tension here between this bishop and this bishop on b6. Another idea is that he could just go ahead and take the bishop at e3. And after fe3, I think this is why he didn't play that move. White's f-file gets opened up, and the rook, the queen, and the bishop all aim at f7. Also, this pawn at e3 plugs up some central holes, increases his control of the center. Nevertheless, this probably was the best option. In this position, black is still okay. It's really hard for white to get at f7 here, particularly after black castles. So that might have been the best option, because instead Fedoseev plays a passive move. He plays the move bishop to d8. And this loss of a tempo and concession to the e3 bishop of this diagonal, it definitely does not work out very well. Knight jumps into f5, as we've seen, and he retakes with the bishop. Queen takes. So why would Nakamura give up his knight like that? Well, because now he has the advantage of the two bishops. And that gives him a strategic edge. Here, Fedoseev plays queen to d7, offering the exchange of queens to go into an endgame. And Nakamura actually could have taken the queen. This is a pretty decent endgame for white. He has the two bishops in an endgame. He can play f4, open the position up a little bit. But he instead decides to keep things complex. That is more his style. He's a great endgame player, but he likes to keep things complicated. So he plays the queen to f3, black castles, and now d4. Since the f pawn was blocked, he decides to break with the d4 pawn instead. E d4, bishop takes d4. Now just look at these bishops. They can't necessarily stay in these positions for long, but right now they just go the entire length of the board, aiming right at black's king. And that could be real danger. In fact, after the a1 rook develops, the only less than great piece white has is this knight on c3, which maybe he could maneuver to g3 and develop in that way. Rook goes to e8, hitting e4, rook f to e1. And now, Fedoseev's next move is a blunder. I'm going to play the move, and I want you to see if you can figure out what Nakamura's response was. The move is queen to c7, and this move looks perfectly reasonable at first sight, I think. Can you spot Nakamura's double exclamation point response to queen to c7? I'll give you a second. That's right. Knight takes b5, an amazing move. In addition to hitting the queen, it also creates more difficult problems for black. As it turns out, the best move for black was rook to c8, and we'll see why in a second, why that was the best idea. After knight b5, cb5, e5 was played. And by the way, if he delays taking the knight, say plays queen to d7, e5 still works because of the pin on the c6 pawn to the rook. What e5 does, the queen attacks the rook at a8, and the pawn attacks the knight at f6. So Nakamura is going to get a material advantage now. It would be a real mistake to try to save the rook, because then after pawn takes knight, black's position is just a disaster. He's just going to get crushed on the king side. So he pretty much has to give up the exchange. So black plays d takes e5. Nakamura takes the rook at a8. And here, if black takes on d4, then Nakamura would just take the knight on a6. So instead, Fedoseev plays the knight to c5, at the very least putting some pressure on this bishop on b3. The bishop takes at e5, hits the queen, so there are captures on e5. Then queen takes d8 check, king to h7, and queen to a5. And now we can take a look at the position. Nakamura, though, does have a big positional advantage. He's up 2 pawns and an exchange. Knight f4 was played by Fedoseev. So this is the beginning of potential tricks. You notice he's attacking this f2 pawn and hovering around white's king. So Nakamura just says, forget it. I'm bringing the queen all the way back. I'll give you this b2 pawn. I just want to keep d2 defended and deal with it that way. So queen takes b2, so Fedoseev gets one of his pawns back. Now you notice something very important. These knights are defending each other. And this is always an awkward placement of knights. You'd rather not have your knights doing this. And it's a particular problem here because this knight, if white were to capture it with the queen, he'd be delivering check also. So these knights are kind of tied down and they're sort of in each other's way. And that allows Nakamura to play this next move, a4. And after pawn takes, he doesn't take with the bishop, he takes with the rook. And if Fedoseev takes the rook, then queen to e4 check. It's the king and the knight at a4, so that definitely would not work out at all. So Fedoseev, instead of grabbing that material, has to retreat the knight back to f6. Now rook to b4, setting up discoveries against the queen on b2. And you notice the queen on e1 defends that rook on b4. That allows that to happen. If something like knight f to d7, then just bishop takes f7, and all these light squares around black's king he's just in big trouble. After rook to b4, he plays knight takes b3, pawn takes b3, and Fedoseev plays queen to c2, and in this position, his clock hit 0, but make no mistake, the game is over. Computers give white +8. Being up in exchange, the rook versus the knight, plus this passed pawn, means that not only is this position winning, the winning process is also very easy. So he would win this game no matter what. But Fedoseev's clock went down. Now, even after going over this great game from Hikaru Nakamura, there is still some great chess that you're missing out on. To fix that problem, believe it or not, the key game you're going to want to watch is in this video right here, so be sure to watch that next for some really mind-blowing chess. Goodbye.